I'm sorry I was gone for so long, but I'm back now. I'm not going away. Death Note is a series I watched when I was really young. In my early teens, you know, that prime angsty time of your life where you're really self-righteous and self-indulgent and you really latch on to these power fantasies in the media. In my opinion, Death Note is one such power fantasy. It's about the perfect high school student that's so good at everything that they let their boredom and narcissism consume them and they try to become the god of the new world. You know Death Note, I'm not really going to explain it. So what about Death Note would appeal to someone like me? I'm a black leftist. I don't like the police and I don't like a supremacist. So what about this show interests me so much? Death Note's discourse is often simplified to who was smarter and was light right? And it's a little bit tiring because I think the more interesting question is, what kind of system produces someone like Light? I never understood the appeal of L. He's kind of appealing in that he's like what I'm like when I'm programming, but outside that, he's the exact same as Light. What's it called? The creator explicitly said that.
I will hunt you down wherever you're hiding and I will eliminate you.
Unless I take you down first.
That's the whole point and parallel. When Light is screaming in his room about how he's gonna hunt down and execute L is saying the exact same thing. People like to point out that Light is pathetic and evil, and I can't help but feel like that assessment feeds this key point, that we hyper-individualize things. Light doesn't exist in a vacuum. People don't exist in vacuums. If the police are so honorable, if Light's father is really this paragon of human virtue, then why does Light exist? Why does Light use the Death Note to punish those that he deems as criminals? If supposedly his environment was nothing but positivity, why does he turn out the way he does? A lot of people don't like the anime ending because they think it frames Light as this fallen hero, as someone that we're supposed to sympathize with, when he should be writhing in agony on the ground. I see people cheer Matsuda when he loses it and nearly shoots him dead in frustration. But what does that accomplish? There's no sense of reflection. This is what Kira was doing. It doesn't surprise me he was a sympathizer because his actions back it up. And that's not bad writing, I think that's cool. But it raises an interesting thought. Why does Light have this view on criminality? Why does he dehumanize people labeled as criminals and think it's right to kill them? Because that's what the police do. That's what the government does. That's what L wanted to do. Light exists on an extreme spectrum of what is already happening. He's an extension of it. A young boy so immersed into this world that he is a direct product of this influence. He exists within these binaries of imprisonment and execution as a means of serving justice, both being a cowardly means of addressing the faults with our society. Prisons do not disappear social problems, they disappear human beings. Homelessness, unemployment, drug addiction, mental illness, and illiteracy are only a few of the problems that disappear from the public view when human beings are contending with them, or the human beings that are contending with them are relegated to cages. Now that's a quote about prison, but if my point earlier isn't making it clear, I don't really see much of a difference, because the perspective remains the same. Whether you're taking them out or taking them out, you're effectively trying to remove these people from society so we don't have to think about them anymore. So we don't have to think about how many people are actually homeless because they don't count if they're in a prison cell. We don't have to think about how many people are unemployed because they don't count if they're in a prison cell, right? When we speak on prisons being seen as a solution to social and economic problems, this is part of what is being addressed. That we're not solving problems, we're removing casualties.
Then jails and prisons also ought to be considered impermanent. We should be capable of finding ways of addressing the problems that jails and prisons purport to solve that are less damaging to our communities.
Life is beautiful, don't you think so too, Mr. Jailer? I'm talking to you, Jailer. Stop calling me a prisoner. Let he who is without sin be the first to cast the stone, Mr. Jailer. Mr. Jailer man.
So, am I saying that Death Note makes me think of prison abolition? A little bit. At least, it makes me think of two key things related to it. One, how criminality is used to dehumanize people and justify our unfair treatment of them. And two, how hyper-individualism has destroyed our collective responsibility. Let's start with the former. I'm always talking about the war on drugs. President Nixon's advisor was very explicit in how they decided to demonize black people in the media for a political campaign. You get them in jail for drugs, they work in private prisons for free labor, and then we could ignore how badly black people are positioned in society because, again, they're in jail. It don't matter. When you're in prison, you are officially off the radar. We thus think about imprisonment as a fate reserved for the others, a fate reserved for the evildoers, to use a term that was recently popularized by George W. Bush, because the persistent power of racism, criminals and evildoers are, in the collective imagination, fantasized as people of color. In the UK, joint culpability acts exist systemically to group individuals into gangs, and if your friend goes to jail, you can go to jail too. If you try to apply for a job, the first question they're gonna ask you about is convictions. And if you've got one, kiss the opportunity goodbye, Given the disproportionate targeting of the police and institutional racism, it paints a scary picture of the prison system, of our quote-unquote justice system. I got excluded from school at one point. The rule is, if you get excluded from school, you're on a one-way trip to jail. The prison pipeline is scary. Like, we use this term industrial complex, but do we know what it means? Do you know what it actually means? Because I feel like people just throw it around to sound smart, but we don't actually know what it means. It means that people in power have incentive to ensure more people are put in jail because it generates more profit and masks a lot of issues. And that's not a go prison, +1 for prison. That's a statement on how easy it is to mask issues if you throw people in jail. In the meantime, corporations associated with the punishment industry reap profits from the system that manages prisoners and acquire a clear stake in the continued growth of prison populations. Put simply, this is the era of the prison industrial complex. The prison has become a black hole into which the detritus of contemporary black capitalism, I said black capitalism? Run that back. The prison has become a black hole into which the detritus of contemporary capitalism is deposited. Mass imprisonment generates profits as it devours social wealth, and thus it tends to reproduce the very same conditions that lead people to prison. When L thinks Misa is Kira, he blindfolds and tortures her. Then he restrains Light for days with minimal food. And when he realizes he could be wrong, he just keeps going and makes his dad threaten to off him just to be sure. Hey, this was evil. It was an abuse of power. But because he perceived criminality and we have some degree of dramatic irony, we justify it. The best part of Death Note, in my opinion, isn't when Light has the notebook. It's when he doesn't. It's when he revokes it and we're finally allowed to see his innocence again. This earnest confusion. I'm not trying to justify Light's actions either, but it's much more to say, this is when the show lets us actually see Light. Not as this evil mastermind, but a genuine prisoner. And I don't just mean to the notebook or the power it wields. There's no better way of making the point I'm trying to make than these early scenes of Light finally I hate work!
Would I punish evildoers and criminals if I could kill by just seeing a name and face? Is that what I'd do if I had that sort of power? I mean, it's true that there are lots of people around that the world could frankly do without, but I don't think I'd become a murderer just to change the world. Surely I wouldn't do that. No, I'm thinking too hard about this.
There's no better way of making the point I'm trying to make than these early scenes of Light finally being set free and L dragging him back into it. The second L realized that Light was no longer Kira, he should have let him go. Maybe even had him go through some rehabilitation classes or something. But he didn't. He was obsessed with catching this original figment, with criminalizing this version of Light that he saw and seeing to it that he was executed, when even if it was true, they lost their chance at saving him. In these moments, Light is genuinely conflicted and ashamed of some of his thoughts on the situation, and instead of helping him through that, they drag him back into it. Let's be real, let's be so real, right? If L is as smart as everybody thinks he is, then he knows it's not him. Or at the very least, he knows it's not him anymore. And he admits that. Help him. And it's this lack of collective responsibility and inaction that leads him down the same path. I'm not absolving light of responsibility, but much more communicating that this responsibility is collective, which leads me to my final point. We individualize responsibility because it's easy. We can absolve ourselves of any role we play in a bad situation because they should have acted differently, and she should have dressed more appropriately, and he shouldn't have talked back, and all this hyper-individual nonsense. It's the ideological work that the prison performs. It relieves us of the responsibility of seriously engaging with the problems of our society, especially those produced by racism and increasingly global capitalism. I think prison abolition is an interesting topic because it requires a complete shift in perspective. I think we live in a hyper-individualistic culture, and I say that knowing in a lot of ways, I perpetuate it. I don't like working with other people. I hate people throwing me into categories. And in a lot of ways, I conflate my sense of freedom with my ability to separate myself from that, to define my sense of self. And I think there's value in that. I think the contradiction lies in how we perceive others and individualize others. We completely divorce people from the conditions in which they're created because it's easier. It's easier for me to look at any member of society and say, well, it's because they're stupid. It's because they're evil. It's because they don't care, without actually examining the conditions which led them to that point. I'm a programmer now, so I can actually think of this in a practical way, right? To my programmer friends, you'll get it, and to the people that aren't, well, can follow along, I think, right? You can follow along, you do your thing, come on. Follow me to the destination. No, you knows about that. What's it? If I create a code that instantiates a new game object every second, and every 3 of those game objects produces an error, the solution isn't to remove the game objects manually. The solution is to write a better code. Let's think on a bigger scale now. Our code doesn't work because we constantly need to remove people from society to create the illusion of freedom and free will. My question is, why are people so quick to assume that locking away an increasingly large proportion of the US population would help those who live in the free world feel safer and more secure? The only real benefit of removing people is to downplay the significance of why it's happening. It's like we trade out tangible solutions with incarceration and vague platitudes of justice, not to serve society as a whole, but to satiate individual desires for revenge and corporate interest. And given how we approach war and imperialism, it really doesn't surprise me. Naturally, we're discussing prison abolition, we get that pushback, but what's the alternative? What other options do we really have here? According to Angela Davis, it would be bigger than that. Like, let's say Kira was real for a second. Let's play along with me. Let's play this game. You're telling me Kira would be the only problem? The first issue. No. Let's do this. Let me do it. Let me set up. You know the meme. Let me sit forward. And like, let me lock in real quick. Let's do this. Let's do this dance. Let's do this song and dance together. Let's do this. Yeah. You're telling me Kira would be the only problem? The first issue would be how the media reports on these people to begin with. If Kira gets their understanding of the extent of someone's criminality through the media, then we need to have a conversation about the media and how they report on these tragedies and sensationalize these things in headlines for monetary profit. If Kira adopts their sense of justice from the police system and the government, then we need to have a conversation about how vengeful our approach to criminality is. If Kira's understanding of violent retribution is learned from our society, is indoctrinated in our academic institutions, is a direct product of what our children are being exposed to, what does that say about our society? Positing decarceration as an overarching strategy, we would try to envision a continuum of alternatives to imprisonment, to demilitarize schools, the revitalization of education at all levels, a health system that provides free and physical mental care to all, and a justice system based on reparation and reconciliation, rather than retribution and vengeance. Death Note is interesting to me because when you look at it from the lens of a black leftist, it's a commentary on how contemporary society failed what was supposed to be, or supposedly, their ideal candidate for success. I don't look at Death Note and my only takeaway is, this could happen to anyone because power corrupts. I look at it and go, this could happen to anyone because this is what our system produces and perpetuates. I'm a Christian universalist, right? That's me. That's what I stand for. That means I think that everyone is ultimately going to be saved in the end. There's a ton of different ways to engage with your spirituality. I encourage anyone who struggles with that stuff, Make sense of it on your own. There are so many nuances and doctrines out there. You don't need to conform to homogenized ideas for acceptance. Make sense of this life on your own. But this perspective is what makes Death Note even more interesting to me, or at least interesting for me to look at, right? Now, the problem many people have with this perspective is, in the eyes of many, what's the point in being good if everyone gets a place in the afterlife? Which raises some interesting questions about morality. Why is the only way to make sense of my morality through the demonization of others? Why, for my actions to be truth and to be justified, must someone else be suffering? What's so divine about punishment and retribution? Especially if it's something humanity constantly finds itself succumbing to and playing the enforcer of. Death Note interests me because Kira is a mirror for society. His ideas aren't in the abstract, he's an imitation of what he's taught and how he understands the world. When we are told people are born into patriarchy, it means you actively have to unlearn internalized misogyny. You have to actively unlearn racism and colonial ideas. You have to unlearn homophobia and bigotry. Kira was not born evil. Light was not born evil. Nobody is born evil. I am not so enamored with simplifying the discourse around people, the products of hierarchy, that I feel the need to individualize the criminality of black people, the violence towards trans people, as simply enemies of the state, as simply just evil. These binaries are tools of oppression designed to divide. Light was Kira and he did terrible things. You want to play God? Who the hell do you think you are? But he was also a young boy failed by society and the institutions around him. In another world, Light never uses the Death Note. Not because he would be this paragon of virtue, but because that wouldn't be how justice was sold to him, as domineering, unapologetic, vengeful, and violent. And I'm not saying it's easy, it's not. But in the words of Angela Davis, we have to talk about liberating our minds, as well as liberating society.
If you let it come through, I'ma give it to you better than you ever had it. Girl, I promise I'ma be the only thing you wanna do. Making you forget about your automatic, you already know. I can't love you better. Can we live together? Why? It's a problem. You better follow me. I give you this, you the lottery. I know all the stars, astrology. Last deposit, fucked up the whole economy. Getting it. Spent 2010 pitching, Kush piffing it. Every white straight infinite. You different. Last night, picture it 7 times. That black chick trying white. Better line, I'm the future. Real beef, I shoot you. Walk, no talk, no subbing, no woofers. This song. Tell by my tone. Real call, better answer your phone. You can let me hit or not. Can I check or not? You gon' let me watch you strip or not?